We begin the Gemara today on Daf Lamed Tes Samad Beis, about 15-20 lines up from the bottom of the Yamud where it says Mari Baresek. The Gemara before was discussing the halacha regarding a person that got captured and he left his property without anyone to take care of it, whether you allow a relative to go and work in that property, and if the relative works in the property while this person is away, and then he comes back home, what does this worker, this relative that worked there, get paid like? And the Gemara before said he gets paid like an otis, like a sharecropper. He gets a fair share of what he invested and so on. Okay, so in connection to this, Gemara brings another story, which eventually Gemara will ask on the story from this halacha that I just mentioned. So Mari Baresek, an individual by the name of Mari Baresek, Asa Lei Acha Mi Bei Chuzoi. After his father passed away and he inherited his father's properties, a person, his brother actually, shows up from Chuzoi. As Rashi says, what happened is Mari Baresek moved with his father to Chuzoi, and there his father gave birth to another child, his brother, but Mari Baresek himself moved away when this child was very young. And now, after the father passes away, it's years later, and his brother shows up. Amalei, so his brother says to Mari Baresek, Ploigli, divide the inheritance with me. Amalei, so Mari Baresek looks at him and says to him, Lo yadain alach, I don't recognize you. He says, you're not my brother. So they came to Rav Chisda to ask about this case. Amalei, so Rav Chisda says to the brother that showed up, Shapik Amalach. What he's telling you is a good argument. Shanema, as we see, it says in the pasuk regarding Yosef and his brothers, Vayaki Yosef esechov. Yosef recognized his brothers, but Vehem lo yikiru. But his brothers did not recognize him. Why not? It's because when Yosef was departed from his brothers, he had no beard. And now he had a beard, so he was a different appearance, and they didn't recognize him. So Rav Chisda was saying the fact that Mari Baresek is saying that he doesn't recognize his brother, it's very possible, Taka, that he doesn't see you, he doesn't know who you are. Amalei, so Rav Chisda said to this individual, this brother, Zilai Sisade, Dachuat, go bring Eidim that you're actually a brother. Amalei, so this brother says to Rav Chisda, Isli Sadi, I have Eidim that I'm a brother. But V'dachli Minei, they're afraid to come and testify that I'm a brother, because the Gavra Alimuhu, because Mari Baresek, my brother, is a very big bully. And they're afraid to come and testify, and then take away half of the inheritance from him. So they're not going to testify on my behalf. So what am I going to do? Amalei. So Rav Chisda then turned around to Mari Baresek. Amalei Lidei. He says to Mari Baresek, Zil antai sisade de lavachachu. So you will go ahead and bring Eidim that will testify that this is not your brother. Okay, so which is very unusual. He's the one that is definitely Yairish. And he has the possessions of his father, the assets of his father in his possession. And Rav Chisda is telling him, you go bring Eidim that this individual here that claims that he's a brother, that he's not a brother. So Amalei, so Mari Baresek says to Rav Chisda, Dina Hachi, this is the halacha, that I, which am definitely an inheritor, I'm definitely a son here, and I have it, I have to prove that this person is not my brother. The rule always is, someone that comes to take out money from anyone, he has to bring proof. So he has to bring proof that he's my brother. Why should I bring proof that he's not my brother? Amalei, Rav Chisda answered to this individual, this is how I paskin for a person like you and all the other people that are that are bullies like you. Because you're a person that people are intimidated by you, and he can't bring Eidim. He can't bring Eidim to prove that he's your brother. They're afraid to come to testify on his behalf. So you have no choice. You're going to be the one that has to bring Eidim that he's not your brother. Amalei, so Mari Baresek, he's a smart aleck. He says to Rav Chisda, Sof, also Sadi v'lei misadi. What, you're telling me to bring Eidim to testify that he's not my brother? In the end of the day, these Eidim are going to come. They're never going to testify. You're going to trust these Eidim? If you say that I'm the bully and Eidim are afraid of me, so then the Eidim are not going to say the truth. These Eidim that I'm bringing, even if they know the truth that he is my brother, because they're afraid of me, they're going to testify that he's not my brother. So you telling me to bring the Mari Baresek to bring Eidim that he's not the brother is not going to help. The Eidim are going to lie if they're intimidated by him. Amalei, so Rav Chisda said, no, Tarti le'avdi. I'm not afraid that they're going to do two things that are not right. In other words, what we were afraid before was, this brother here said, the Eidim that I have are intimidated. They're afraid to come to the Bezin to testify that I'm a brother. So they're just going to stay out of Bezin. They're going to stay quiet. But Rav Chisda is saying to Mari Baresek, if you're going to bring Eidim to testify we're not afraid that the Edom are actually going to lie. If they're going to come into Bezdin and they're going to testify that this person is not a brother, we're going to trust them. Because we're not actually afraid that they're going to say a real lie. The Saif, in the end, what happened? The Edom came and testified that this is a brother, like it was. It just, like the Gemara said before, he left when he was young, but this is a brother. So now, Amalei, this brother tells Mari Bar Esek, so Lifklegli, I want you to divide with me the inheritance, Nami mi Pardesi, from the orchards, or from the, Pardesi is the vineyards, or the Bustani and the orchards, the Shassel, that you planted. So even though this is something that Mari Bar Esek, after the father died, he's the one that worked and improved the property of the inheritance, but the brother now is saying, if I'm a brother now, I have to get half of the inheritance, including of what you improved over here. Amalei, Sarav Chistis says to Mari Bar Esek, Shapik HaMalach. What he's saying is actually true. Because the Tnam, we learned in the Mishnah, Hiniach Bonim Gedolim Ketanim. If a father left his properties, and there are older children and there are younger children here that are inheriting this. And the older children came and they improved the property. And what it's talking about over here is before it was divided. Before the inheritance was divided between the brothers, and the older children went and worked in the property and improved it. What they improved, who gains from this? All the brothers, including the younger brothers that did not get involved in investing and working, they also get the improvement of what the older brothers did. And the reason for this is because the inheritance wasn't divided yet. And the older brothers that went and worked didn't make a clear condition that we're doing it for our own sake. They went and improved the property that belonged to everybody together. It wasn't divided yet. So without making a clear condition, by doing this, they're Michael. They're doing it for all the brothers. They're doing it for everyone. So over here as well, this brother is telling Mari Bar Esek that even the things that you improved and you worked on, I have to get half of it as well. And the Gemara brings now, Rabbi said the same thing, the older brothers that worked and improved the property, the improvement goes for everybody, for the younger brothers as well. Rashi here actually says, not to be good, it's this line, because this is very unusual, that the Gemara should bring a Mishnah, and then afterwards bring that there's an Amayra that said the same like a Mishnah. Why would you need the proof of an Amayra to the Mishnah? Especially Rabbi was actually a student of Rav Chisda, so it's something that says, so Rashi says not to be good, or he says if you good you have to read it, V'chein Rav. Not Rabba, but Rav, and it's coming to say, because Rashi says there could be another pshat in that Mishnah. When it says the v'hishbichu gedolim, maybe v'hishbichu doesn't mean that the older brothers, they personally went and invested, but maybe the pshat in that Mishnah would mean that there was a shvach of the property that it just happened on its own. So the Gemara is bringing that Rav explained hishbichu. Hishbichu means that the older children actually worked. And even though they worked and invested, nevertheless, the shvach of the property does get shared by everybody equally. So Abaye asked Rav Chisda on the Psak Din that he said it, that this brother, that now was proven that he's a brother of Mari Bar Esek, that he as well should get a portion of this property, and also from the improvement as well. Abaye says to Rav Chisda, Midami, how can you compare to that case? Hasam Gedolim Gabi Ketanim Yadi. Over there, when it comes to the Gedolim and the Ketanim, so the Gedolim, the older children, were aware that they have brothers, younger children, brothers, that the properties belong to them as well. And therefore, if they're investing in the property before the division, and they're not making a clear condition that our investment is just for ourselves, so then they're being Michael. They obviously are investing for everybody together. However, here in our case, Mi Yada de Lechel, this Mari Bar Esek, when he invested in the property, did he know about this other brother that now showed up? He forgot about that brother. He wasn't doing it having in mind that there's another brother here that I'm investing for him. So over here, it's clear that when he invested in the property, he was doing it for himself. Gemara says, "Yigalgal milsa matla kamei de Rabami." This matter evolved. In other words, this matter came to Rabami. And now, what did Rabami say about this? Amalahu. So Rabami said as follows. And here we come back to the case that I mentioned before regarding a person that's captured. There was even a bigger chiddush that was said, Shamin lahem ka'aris, when it came to the person that we learned before on the Bava Metzia, a person that was captured. And at such a time, the Bezdin says to a karev, to a relative, go and work in the property while this person is away. And then what happens if the owner shows up again? Now, the person that worked there all this time, he gets paid for the work that he did. a certain percent, like an artist, a sharecropper that takes a percent of his work. And we're not going to say that what he worked and what he did just belongs all to the owner. No, he gets a certain percent for himself. So, if so, Rab Ami said, Hashta over here, in our case, Didei lo yavinanle. This brother, Mari Bar Esek, that is, he worked here in this property, and it's his. He's not just working in someone else's property that's captured. He's a Yiddish over here, and he improved the property. He shouldn't get a certain percent for himself, more now than the brother. He should have to divide equally with his brother if he invested himself in something that's his own. That was what Rabami said. So Rabami was also arguing with Rav Chisda's Psak Din. It's not fair to divide it equally between Mari Bar Esek and his brother if Mari Bar Esek invested on his own over here. Ahadrua ha lekamei de Rav Chisda. They brought back this svara, that Rav Ami said to Rav Chisda, that argued with Rav Chisda's Psak Din. Amaluhu, so Rav Chisda said, no, I disagree with Rabami. Me, Dami, how could you compare our case to the case of a karev, of a relative that was working in the property of a person that was captured? In that case, the relative that was working in this person's property, it was with the reshus. That's what Bezdin sees. A person just was forced and left his property and it's sitting empty and no one's going to take care of it, so they tell a relative to go and take care of the property in the time when this person is away. So therefore, he came into the property with reshus, so he gets a certain percent from what he improved here. However, over here in our case, lav b'reshus nachis. Mari Bar Esek, when he comes and improves the property before he makes sure to see whether there's another brother or not, he's not getting a special reshus from the Bezdin go and improve this property before there's a proper division over here. Another point there is cottonhu. Over here, in our case, when he came and worked in this property, the brother that showed up was still a cotton. And if it was still a cotton, so the halach is, as the Gemara said before, you're not allowed to go and work in the property of a cotton without the permission, without the property of a cotton. We don't let you go and work in it, the Gemara said before, because if you work in the property of a cotton, we're afraid that later on you may come and claim, it's all mine. You'll take advantage of this cotton that can't argue for himself. So over here, Mari Bar Esek that went and worked and improved this property, there's no reason why we should now give him any percent, any payment as a artist, as a worker. They brought back what Rav Chisda said about his Psak Din to explain what his Psak Din was based on. They brought it back to what Rabami, to Rabami, that is. Amalahu, so Rabami said, the cotton. They didn't tell me that this brother that showed up now was a cotton when Rav Chisda, when Mari Bar Esek worked in the property. I didn't know he was a cotton. He didn't tell me that point. And because this point about the cotton, he agreed to Rav Chisda's Psak Din that what Mari Bar Esek worked and improved in the property, he doesn't get any share as a artist, as a sharecropper. Now that they're dividing the properties between them, you divide it equally, and the brother receives half of everything, including what was improved, together with Mari Bar Esek. Okay, let's go back to now the Mishnah here comes back to the halachas of a pekadon. A person gives fruits to his friend as a pekadon. So what happens is, fruits over time will diminish, whether because of mice that come that eat from it, or from other things, as the Gemara will soon say. So you have to deduct from the different types of fruits. There's a certain portion that's diminished of it. So when you return it to the owner, you don't give him back the same amount of fruits that he gave you when he gave you the pekadon. You give him less. Rashi says, as we'll see in the Gemara, we're talking here about a case where the fruits that this person gave you, you mixed it together with your own fruits. If it's a case where you put the fruit separately, so you clearly see what he gave you, and you just return it to him, whatever it is, whatever's left of it. But over here, you mixed it with your own fruits, so it's not clear exactly how much it diminished. So the Mishnah gives certain shiurim regarding different types of fruits, what we assume was diminished of them, according to the nature of those produce or fruits. Now, if he gave you wheat or rice, we estimate that what diminished is 9.5 kabin lukur to a kor, which is 1 out of 40. That's what the measurement comes out to be. If it's barley or daichin, which I think is translated as millet, am I right? That's tisha kabin. So then it diminishes more. It diminishes 9 kabin, which is double that amount that we just said. It diminishes 1 out of 20. Lukur for the akor. Lukusmin or lezera pishton. If it's kusmin, which is spelt, or zera pishton, which is flax, shalish sa'in lakur. it diminishes 3 saw to a kor, which is 1 out of 10. Now you estimate this according to the amount that you have. If you have 1 kor, so then it's the measurement that we just said. If you have 2 kor, so then you have to double the amount that it diminishes. And also this is on a yearly basis. Every single year you give back, you deduct this amount. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri argues with this last point, that you go according to the amount you have and also according to the every year, on a yearly basis. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says it doesn't matter. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri here says that the reason why fruits, produce diminish is because mice that eat from it. So therefore he says, to the mice, the amount that you have doesn't make a difference. Whether you have 1 core of this produce or you have 10 or 20, doesn't make a difference. You could have a large amount, but the mice are eating what they need. The same amount that we just mentioned is what the mice are eating. So therefore Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, we measure what we said before, the amount regarding a core, and that amount, now you could have 2 core, you could have 10 core, but the mice are eating the same amount either way. So you only give that what diminished that we mentioned before. Rabbi Yehuda says another point. That is, if you have a large amount of produce that this person gave you as a pekadon, and the Gemara is going to say that that's 10 core, then when you return it to him, you're not going to give him back and deduct what diminished from these, from the produce, from the fruits. The reason is because it expands. What the Gemara is what it's talking about here, as Rashi brings, we'll see in the Gemara, that when you get these fruits in the summertime, in the harvest season, when they're dry, and then you're returning it to him later in the winter, when it's moist and wet outside, and the nature of these fruits are that they expand. So even if there are mice that ate from it, and therefore there's a certain amount that was diminished, but then it expands. So when it expands, you end up with the offsets to whatever diminished. You have the same amount. So you give it back as you received it. Now the Gemara asks on this, we said rice, how much is rice, what's the chesar and how much rice gets diminished? 1 out of 40. But the Gemara asks, the fact is, but that by rice over time, it diminishes much more. Rabbi Bava says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, kolov shano. Here it's talking about peeled rice, and regarding peeled rice, it doesn't diminish that much. And it said in the Mishnah, la kusman, la zara pishton, gimel sal lakor, by kusman, by spelt, or pishton, or flax, it's 3 saw for a core that it gets diminished. By the zera pishton, it's when it's in the givoilin. How do they translate givoilin over there? When it's in the in the husks, right? When it's in the husks, that's where it diminishes this amount. Tanya nami hachi, as we learned this also in a brayse, lekusman or lezara pishton begivoilin, when it's still in the husks. Now, when it's rice that's not peeled, shloisha saw in the core, it diminishes much more than what the Mishnah says. It diminishes 1 out of 10. That's 3 saw for a core. Then the Mishnah said that you deduct according to the amount that you have and according to the time. What did it mean, the amount and time? So Tana, it said in the Brayse, as I explained in the Mishnah, kain l'chol kor v'kor, for each kor you deduct the amount the Mishnah mentioned, and v'chein l'chol shana v'shana. It's also on a yearly basis you deduct this amount. And on that, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri argued, when the mice eat from this produce or whatever it may be, they eat whatever they eat. There's no reason to deduct more if it's a bigger amount. It's a very good question that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri asked. So Tanya, in Rashi, we learned that Chachamim responded, Amru loy, Rabbi Yochanan, Chachamim answered Rabbi Yochanan and said, Harbe oides mehen. It's not only the mice that eat. When you have a large amount, the more you have, this is what's get lost. And harbe mispazris mehen, there's some kernels from the rice that spreads out, and then with the wind, so you have to take off what gets diminished, not just because of the mice. So therefore, the more you have, the more you have to take off, the more you have to deduct from what you return. Atane and a brayse we learned when's the application of this whole halacha that our Mishnah says, as I explained in the Mishnah, Bamed, when was all this said? She'irvan in Pereisav. When you got this produce as a pekadon, and then you mixed it with your own peiris. So now, when you're returning, you know the amount that you got, but it's not exactly clear how much diminished in order to know what you return. That's why the Mishnah is giving you a certain amount. Aval, yichud loy keren zavis, if when you got a pekadon, fruits, produce of a person, and you put it in one particular corner, so then we don't go according to the amounts that it says in the Mishnah. You just give the person back, you know exactly where it is, it's separate, and you give him back what it is, as it is. But the Gemara asks him this, Why, if it's mixed with your fruits, so why are we saying that we give it a certain set amount that we assume that it diminished? Lechsi lididei kama havyin. Why doesn't the person see? He knows how much fruits he had, and he knows how much he got additionally from his friend, and now you can go and estimate and see how much it is that was diminished over here. And says the Gemara, b'mistapik mehem. It's because the person is using, he's using from his own fruits, he's eating from it, and therefore he doesn't know exactly what it is that's left over here. But the Gemara asks, why not? V'lechsi kama istapik. Let him see, let him make a cheshbon of exactly how much it is that he ate from his own fruits, and then he'll know, based on the calculation of what it was and what it is now, and how much is diminished from his friend's fruits that he gave him as a pekadon. And says the Gemara, the case over here is the lo yadi or the lo yada kama istapik. He eats from it and he doesn't make a cheshbon, he doesn't know exactly how much he took, so he's not going to know how much to give back to his friend for the pekadon here. So therefore the Mishnah gives you these set amounts that we could assume how much it diminishes from the amounts we mentioned before. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says, if you have a large amount of this produce, so then you say that if you got it in the harvest season and you're returning it already in the winter season when it's moist, then we say that it expanded over time. Because you got it dry and then it gets moist, it expands. Now, kama mida beruba. How much is this mida beruba, this large amount that we say that it expands? Asara kurin. And it's 10 kor. When you have 10 kor, whatever diminished, 10 kor is a very large amount that you can say that when it expanded, it offsets this that was diminished. Tanya nami hachi, we learned this in a brayse as well. Kama mida beruba. What was the large amount of produce that Rabbi Yehuda spoke about? Asara korin, the 10 kor. Tani Tana Kamed Rav Nachman. Atana taught a brayse in front of Rav Nachman in connection to our Mishnah and in connection to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. When do we say over here that when you return, you have to return less than what you received as a pekadon? The person that gave you the pekadon, he gave it to you in a vessel from the threshing area, and those vessels used there are larger vessels. And you're returning to him also from the threshing floor there in that area, and you're returning in the same kind of vessels. So then you have to make a cheshbon of how much it diminished. If he's giving you from the vessels that are by the threshing floor, and you're returning to him from the vessels that you have in your house, which are smaller vessels, then you don't have to give him anything, you don't have to diminish anything less, because over here, the vessels that you're using are smaller vessels, so he when he gave you more. He gave you from larger vessels that were more. That's the simple explanation of this brayse that was taught in front of Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said to this Tana, what are we talking about over here? Are we talking about a fool that he gets a pekadon in a larger vessel and is returning it with a vessel from his house which is smaller? The Yavi Bekaili Rabba, they give a pekadon in a larger vessel, V'shakli Bekaili Zutta, and then when you return it to the owner, you give it back in a smaller vessel. So therefore he explained to him like this. Dilme, perhaps, B'mais HaGayren Kamret. The pshat in this brayse is connected to the point that Rabbi Yehuda said in the Mishnah, that in the times of the Gayren, it's the season, in the harvest season, when it's still summer and it's still hot, when the produce is by the threshing floor, and that's when he received this pekadon. And therefore the pshat in this brayse is as follows. When do I say that when you return a pekadon of this produce, that you have to deduct from what it diminished? You received the pekadon in the time of the gayren, in the time when they're threshing, and you returned it in that same time, that same season, which is still when it's summer, it's hot outside, and whatever it is, the fruits are, whatever diminished of it, you're going to have to deduct. If he gave you the pekadon in the time of the gayren, you're returning it to him later when it's already winter and it's moist and it's wet outside, then any you don't have to deduct from what diminishes from these from the produce. That's what the brayse meant, the term is because it expands. The nature is of these fruits, from this produce, that in the time when it's wet, it expands. Rav Papa says to Abaye, if this is really true what you're saying, that a person gives you a barrel of fruits or of produce, whatever it is, and you're saying that in the winter it expands, so the barrel which it's contained in should have burst. So the Gemara says, you're right, there was a story, a case, and the barrel, it was full of this produce, and then it expanded when it came the winter and it's moist and it burst. Ibai say, or the Gemara says it's not always necessarily going to burst. Mishum itzitze. If the barrel wasn't packed tightly, it was space in it. So even if it's going to expand in the winter, but it's going to get pressed together. It's not going to necessarily burst the barrel. Okay, this Mishnah continues from the from the halach of the previous Mishnah regarding what you deduct from what you get as a pekadon. If you get wine in a barrel that you're keeping for someone, so when you return that wine, you deduct a sixth of what you got, and that's because there's the barrel itself absorbs a sixth of this wine. Rabbi Yehuda says you deduct more; you deduct a fifth. Now we see here another halacha similar regarding oil. You deduct 3 lug of 100 lug of oil that you have, that you're keeping for someone in a barrel. And the Mishnah explains what's the 3 lug that you have to deduct. Lug mechze, that is, a lug and a half is shmadim. You deduct for the sediments that were there in this oil that settle, and now you take off that amount. And also lug mechze bella. And there's a lug and a half that you have to deduct from the oil that you return, which the barrel absorbed. Now, but if the oil you got from your friend to keep for him was purified oil, then you don't have to deduct any amount of the oil that you return. You don't deduct for the sediments because it was totally purified. And if it's older barrels that are already absorbed from before and it can't absorb anymore, then you don't have to deduct from what the barrels absorb because it doesn't absorb. Rabbi Yehuda says regarding what it said in our Mishnah, you sell to your friend oil, and he's getting from you oil, purified oil. Now what this means is you're selling oil to your friend. You say to your friend, he pays you a certain amount of money over the year, and you're going to give him a certain amount of oil that he comes and takes from you. Right? So you have the barrels of oil, and your friend comes and takes from your barrel of oil over a certain amount. Over a year, that is, a certain amount. Call you Shana over the entire year. So Rabbi Yehuda says, even though you sold him 100 lug of oil, but the 100 lug that you sold him, he's getting pure oil. What happens is he's taking from the same barrel of oil over the entire year. The oil that's sitting in this barrel, the sediments settle in the barrel. So now he's taking only pure oil. Now you have to therefore deduct from this sale a lug and a half of sediments that are already settled, and therefore he's only going to get a 98 and a half lug from this oil. Okay, now the Gemara will explain that the Chachamim argue with Rabbi Yehuda. We'll see in the Gemara the explanation for this. Okay, now the Gemara starts with the first case of what it said in the Mishnah, the machlokes regarding wine. How much do you deduct from what a barrel absorbs from wine? Says the Gemara v'loi pligi. They're not really arguing in our Mishnah. Marki Yasrei or Marki Yasrei. The Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, each one is saying according to his place the nature of how much the barrel absorbs. In the place of the Tanakama, so the barrels are they put wax on the inside and the interior of the barrels, so therefore it doesn't absorb that much. It doesn't absorb that much, so therefore it's only a sixth that you have to deduct. But in the place of Rabbi Yehuda, they smeared the barrels with kufra, which is pitch, and therefore it absorbs more, and therefore it loses a fifth of this wine. Okay, that's one pshat. Or another pshat, the Gemara says, Mishum gargishte. It's also the nature of the different places. It depends on the nature of the earth, the quality of the earth that's used to make these earthenware barrels. Over here, talking about earth that you made these barrels from that absorb more, and over here, these barrels that absorb less. Okay, now the Gemara brings another story that happened. Ba'asrei, that Rav Yehuda, in the place of Rav Yehuda, sorry, Ramu Arbaim Otmani Kuzebedana. They had the barrel that they had was from 48 pitchers. Okay, so we're talking over here about oil, I believe. So there was 48 pitchers of oil that they would pour into one barrel. That's how much the barrel contained in it. Now, Ozel Dane Beshite Zuzi. So the barrel was went for the value of what it was sold for was for 6 zuz. Okay, so now, Paris Rav Yehuda, Shitta Bezuze. Rav Yehuda, so he was a storekeeper, and he sold from the oil of this barrel, and he would sell six pitcherfuls for 1 zuz. Okay, so the entire barrel, when Rav Yehuda bought this entire barrel, he was a storekeeper that bought the entire barrel. So, but when he bought this entire barrel, how much did he pay for the entire barrel? 6 zuz. Okay, and what does the entire barrel have in it? 48 pitcherfuls of oil. But when he sold, though, so he sold for a profit. So what did he sell? He sold 6 pitcherfuls for a zuz. So now what does that mean? The Gemara is going to make the cheshbon. How much profit is Rav Yehuda making here from this oil? So the Gemara says like this: Dal klosim v'shite b'shite. It comes out that if he's selling 6 pitcherfuls for 6 zuz, so what that means is that 36 pitcherfuls that are in this barrel, that's already the amount that he paid for it before, that he paid 6 zuz, right? Because 6 times 6, if he's selling each 6 pitcherfuls for 6 zuz, so that means that 36, which is 6 times 6, that's the amount that he actually paid for this barrel. And what does that mean now? This barrel had in it 48 pitcherfuls in it. So Pashaluhu Tracer. He still has, now that was his profit, he still has 12 pitcherfuls in this barrel of oil that he still could sell. Right? So that seemingly that was his profit. But the Gemara says, no, but you still have to deduct more of here from his profit. Dal, Tmanye Shtusi, you still have to take off 8 pitcherfuls, that is, from what's inside this barrel. Shtusi, that's a 6th. Because as we said in the Mishnah, when you get a barrel of oil, or actually the Mishnah was speaking about wine. Okay, so let me just correct that. So we're speaking over here about wine. Okay, so because the Mishnah spoke about wine. What did the Mishnah say? That when you have a barrel of wine, the barrel absorbs a 6th of the wine. So over here as well, when Rav Yehuda, he was a storekeeper, and he bought this barrel of wine, you have to deduct a 6th of this wine that it absorbed in it. So how much is a 6th of this barrel that has in it 48 pitcherfuls? A 6th of that would be, a 6th of that would be 8 pitcherfuls of wine that got absorbed into this large barrel here. So Pashalu Arba. So it comes out that what is his profit? He only has 4 pitcherfuls that he's able to make profit on. That's very little. So the Gemara asks, but for Shmuel, didn't Shmuel say mistaker, a person that's selling and he's making a profit, al yistake yesa al shtus, he shouldn't make a profit more than a 6th, but a 6th is the amount of profit that he deserves and he should be able to make on it. So over here, Rav Yehuda is making a profit which is less than a 6th. Only 4 pitchers in this barrel that has in it the amount of 48 pitchers. He should be making a profit which is double that amount, which is a 6th. What's a 6th of all these barrels? He should be making 8 pitcherfuls as a profit, not just 4. So the Gemara says, no, Ikke Gulfi Ushmaria. There are the Gulfi and the Shmaria. He still is making more profit here because the sediments and also the Gulfi, which means the barrels itself that he can sell, that he's also making a profit off of that. So even the sediments also have some value. People can use it for something, and the barrels itself. So there is an additional amount to his profit over here. But if that's the case, doesn't it come out that then, if even from the sediments and from the barrels he's making a profit, so isn't he then making a profit that's more than a 6th? So the Gemara says, no. There still is his effort as a storekeeper, the laborer that he comes and delivers and he brings these barrels, and also the Dmei Bar Zanaisa that he has to spend. What's the Dmei Bar Zanaisa? So Rashi has 2 pshat. And one pshat Rashi says is, when these storekeepers buy these barrels of wine from the owner that produced this wine, there's an agent that goes around and announces to everybody that there's somebody that has wine to sell, and you have to pay that agent a fee for this agent that's announcing this. It's one pshat. Another pshat Rashi says is Dmei Bar Zanaisa is you have to pay the owner to make you a faucet in this barrel to be able to get out the wine. So that's another amount that he had to pay for this, and therefore it takes off from his profit. And it came out that Rav Yehuda's profit was, like Shmuel said, a 6th of this barrel that had in it 48 pitcherfuls. Okay, going back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, if you got from someone a pekadon refined oil, so then you don't deduct anything for the sediments because you got purified oil. And then the Mishnah said on the other hand also, if you have old barrels, these old barrels don't absorb anything in it, so you don't have to deduct anything for what it would absorb. In fact, the Gemara, but it's not possible that barrels don't absorb at all, even if it's older barrels. So you should deduct something. Rav Nachman says, no, we're talking here about these barrels that are smeared with pitch, and therefore it doesn't absorb at all. Taisus explains over here. The Gemara in Amar Aleph actually said that when it's smeared with this pitch, it does absorb, but over here we're talking about old barrels that are smeared with this pitch, and it does not absorb. Or maybe here it's talking about oil, and before we spoke about wine. It's not the same thing. Abaye says that no, we're not talking about barrels that are smeared with this pitch, but given the ton. Actually, these older barrels, once it's fully absorbed already, oil in it, it can't absorb anymore. So therefore, you don't have to deduct anything. Now the Gemara brings Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, this halacha applies also when you're selling oil for your friend, and you tell your friend, I'm selling you stam oil for the year. That over this year, you can come and take 100 lug of oil from my barrel. All right, so what happens over the year? The oil that he sold him, the sediments settle, and his friend is taking out only the purified oil. Over the entire year. So then Rabbi Yehuda said in the Mishnah, so the buyer has to accept upon himself to deduct from the 100 lug that he bought for the year, a lug and a half for the sediments that settled in this barrel. That's what Rabbi Yehuda said. Now the Gemara here will explain that this is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, but the Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. Chachamim say that no, the buyer receives the full amount of 100 lug of the oil that he bought from this person. So Amar Abaye explained the machlekes as follows: if you'll analyze this and to see, to understand what the argument of here is. So the pshat is as follows: L'divrei Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, muter la'arev shmonim. When you sell oil to someone, you tell someone, I'm selling you oil and you can come and take oil from my barrel. You're allowed to, even if this is a barrel of oil where the sediments already settle, and you're selling the oil, what you can do is you can go and mix the oil that the sediments should be mixed into the oil. So then when your friend buys the oil from you, he's going to get the oil with the sediments. You're allowed to do that. According to the Chachamim's opinion, if you're selling someone oil and the sediments already settled, you're not allowed to go and mix the barrel that the sediments should mix into the oil. He's going to get pure oil from you. Okay, so therefore that's the basis of the machlekes here regarding our case. And the Gemara explains, according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, muter la'arev shmorim. When you're selling oil, you're allowed to mix the sediments into the oil that you are selling. And v'hainu time the makabel. And this is the reason why the buyer is accepting to deduct a certain amount for the sediments. Because the seller tells the buyer, I'm selling you this oil over this year that you're going to take from my barrel. If I wanted, I could have mixed the barrel and you wouldn't get pure oil. So hashanami kabel. So even though now you're taking the oil, pure oil, because the sediments did settle, but that amount that I was allowed to mix in, you have to accept upon yourself to deduct from what I'm selling you. But the Gemara asks on this, why shouldn't the buyer say, if you mixed the sediments into the oil, have them misdavenly. So then I can take this oil with the sediments that I'm buying from you, and I'm able to use the sediments because I'm able to sell it to someone else with the sediments that are in it. Hashta though, now when you're giving me the pure oil without the sediments, if I would take the sediments separately from you, what could I do with these sediments separately? There's nothing I could do with it. I can't sell it anyway. So it's only fair to say, if you actually mix it, you give me the oil with the sediments, that I have to accept. But you can't deduct from me the sediments when they're not mixed in with the oil. So the Gemara answers, no, but Balabayas Askina, we're talking over here about a buyer, which is, he's not buying this to sell to other people. It's a buyer that's a homeowner and he's using this oil for himself, for food. He's happy to have the pure oil without the sediments, and therefore he's happy to deduct it and not have the seller mix the sediments into the oil. So therefore he has to accept to deduct this amount of sediments because he's happy to have the purified oil. But the Gemara still asks, why shouldn't the buyer tell the seller, obviously, you have the right to mix the sediments together with the oil when you're selling it to me, but you didn't. You didn't mix the sediments together with the oil. So from the fact that you didn't do that, what that means is you forgave it. You're letting me take pure oil. If you mixed it, so then fine. So then I have to take it along with the sediments. But if you didn't mix it and it's settled, and you allowed me to take from your barrel, even when it's not mixed, so then you meichel it. So I should get pure oil. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda what Rabbi Yehuda says here follows his reasoning elsewhere, the less le mechila. Rabbi Yehuda holds when it comes to a case of a buyer and a seller, we don't assume such a concept that he's forgiving. Without it being spelled out clearly, we're not going to assume that a seller is forgiving anything. And where's the source for this? It says like this: if you sell a person the yoke that's placed on the cow that works in the field, you didn't sell the animal itself. You just sold the yoke. If you're selling the animal, you didn't sell the yoke. These are two separate things. You sell one, you didn't sell the other. One is not come along with the other. Rabbi Yehuda says, Hadomim Maydin. You can see based on the price that was paid. Did he pay a price that's only for the yoke, or did he pay a price that includes the animal as well? Ketzad, how do you see this? If a person says to someone, sell me this yoke for 200 zuz. Now 200 zuz is not the amount of money you pay for a yoke. It's a lot more money. So then, based on the price, you know, the yoke itself is not worth 200 zuz, so it definitely includes the animal as well. But for the Chachamim say, Ein Hadomim Raya. The money is not considered to be a proof. No, it's possible that even though it's a large amount of money just for the yoke, but we're going to assume that the meicher, that there's a mechila over here. That the buyer, that is giving this large amount of money and is being meichel, this large amount of money to the seller, even though he didn't spell it out clearly. But even without spelling it out clearly, we're going to assume that he's just being meichel, this amount of money. So the Gemara is saying that according to what you see over here is that according to the Chachamim, even without it being spelled out clearly, we assume that there's a mechila here. And therefore the amount of money is not a proof of anything. But Rabbi Yehuda says that no. Rabbi Yehuda says that you can't assume that there's any mechila. Unless it's spelled out clearly, you will look at the amount of money to assess what was being sold over here. Okay, so therefore, the Gemara is saying same thing over here regarding the oil. You can't say that there's an assumption that he was meichel because he didn't mix in the sediments with the oil. There's no such assumptions unless it was spelled out clearly. This is the Shitta of Rabbi Yehuda. Now the Gemara says, "L'divrei Chachamim." What's the explanation of the Chachamim? The Chachamim say that when you sell this oil, you don't deduct any sediments that's settled. Also, la'arev shmarim. You're not allowed to, when you're selling oil to someone and the sediments already settled in the barrel, you're not allowed to go and mix the sediments with the oil when you're selling it. And therefore, and therefore we say that the buyer did not accept upon himself to deduct anything for the sediments that is. Because the buyer says, if you would want to mix the sediments with the oil, would it even be allowed for you? It wouldn't be allowed. So therefore now you didn't mix the sediments, I get the pure oil, and I'm not accepting upon myself to deduct anything for these sediments. This was Abaye's explanation for the machlokes of Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Papa argues with Abaye and he says, Adarabe, on the contrary, Ipchem Estavre. Based on the reasoning that you said, it's logical to explain their machlokes the exact opposite. And he explains as follows. The Chachamim that say that you don't deduct the sediments, what's the reason for this? Because they hold mutter la'arev shmarim. When you're selling someone oil that is, and the sediment settled, you are allowed to mix the sediments together with the oil. So over here, the reason why the buyer is not accepting upon himself that you should deduct any of the sediments when it's not mixed in, because the buyer says obviously you're allowed to mix the sediments together with the oils, but even though you're allowed, you didn't mix the sediments with the oil. What that means is achuli achlisli. That's an indication that you will meichel for me, that I can get pure oil and we don't have to deduct any of the sediments. That's the reason of the Chachamim. But Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, also la'arev shmanim. When you sell oil and the sediments settle, you're not allowed to mix the sediments together with the rest of the oil. And this itself is the reason why we say that the buyer has to accept upon himself to deduct some amount of this oil for the sediments that are in the barrel, that are not mixed in together with the rest of the oil. Because the seller says to the buyer, what is my profit over here? If I want to mix the sediments together with the oil, I'm not allowed to mix the sediments in. You're not going to accept upon yourself to deduct from the sediments that there is at the bottom of the barrel. Zvoim v'zovin tagri ikri. If I buy and I sell for the same amount that what I bought, am I considered to be a merchant? I'm not making any money here. There's no profit in this. In other words, according to Rabbi Yehuda, where is the profit? The profit is when the sediments settle, so you get this less oil that you get. I bought the oil together with the sediments, and I paid for the full amount, and now the sediments settle, and when I sell you less. That's my entire profit. So because that's my entire profit, you have to accept upon yourself to deduct for those sediments that settle. Now the Gemara brings now another halacha here. Till here we're talking about the sediments that settle at the bottom of the barrel of the oil. Now the Gemara brings another halacha, whether it's a case of a buyer or whether it's a case of a person that received a pekadon or a barrel of oil, lepekatim. They have the same halacha regarding pekatim. Pekatim is not sediments. Pekatim is the seeds and the other shmutz that there is in this oil that floats on the top. They both have the same halacha regarding this. Now the Gemara explains, my lepekatim. What does it mean, these pekatim? How do they translate pekatim over there? They have a translation for it? Huh? Okay, whatever. Kopana, the pekatim is not the sediments that settle on the bottom. The pekatim is the seeds and the dirt that's floating in the oil. So now the Gemara explains, what does it mean that a buyer and by a pekatim have the same halacha? If you're going to say the pshat is, just like a buyer does not accept upon himself to deduct anything for these pekatim, so lemekabel pekatim, it doesn't accept to deduct anything. Mafkid nami loy mekabel pekatim. Are you going to say regarding a pekatim, you received a pekatim of oil with these pekatim in it? Are you going to say that you have to return it without the pekatim? Why should I have to return without these pekatim? I got it with you with them. I should return it to you with them. So that can't be the pshat here. Elo, rather what it means is kehechi the mafkid makabel pekatim. Just like regarding the mafkid, when he gives a barrel of oil with this dirt in it, so he gets it back as is. Lekech nami makabel pekatim. So a buyer also, when he buys oil, he has to accept to deduct from the oil these pekatim, the dirt that's in the oil. But that's not true though. Umi makabel lekech pekatim. Does a buyer have to accept upon himself to deduct for this pekatim in the oil? But we learned the brayso of Tanya. Rabbi Yehuda said, "Lo amru shemen achor." When it comes to oil, which is not clear, murky oil, which has in it all these dirt in it, so who's the one that has to take the loss of this? The seller, not the buyer. The buyer, you have to deduct the amount of oil for him just for the sediments at the bottom that is, which is a lug and a half from this amount that he's getting of it, but not pekatim though. The dirt. That's something that it's the seller's responsibility to accept upon himself. So we have over here a contradiction. What's the story over here with a person that's buying oil? Who is the one that that accepts upon himself the value of this, the pekatim, that it reduces this oil? Is it the seller or the buyer? So the one answer is like Hashir, there's no contradiction here. It depends on the season of the year when it was paid for. The Yavle Zuzi b'Tishrei. If he paid money for this in Tishrei time is when the oil is produced, and here the oil has in it still the sediments mixed in, and even the seeds and different shmutz that's mixed in over here. When you pay for the oil in Tishrei time, and that you pay cheaper because the pekatim are still mixed in, and then the kashakal minay b'Nisan, but then he's actually receiving the oil from the seller in Nisan time. Kimida the Tishrei Yudayavle. So then you get for the price that you paid and the amount that you deserve for what you paid in Tishrei time, which is with the dirt inside the oil before it settles and before it's removed. So therefore then the buyer is the one that has to get the loss of these pekatim in the oil. But Benisin, v'kashakul minei, and going back the yavle zuzi benisin v'kashakul minei benisin. But if you pay the price of the oil in Nisan time and you're receiving the oil in Nisan time, committed the Nisan. So then you get the amount of oil of Nisan time, which is pure oil with sediments that are in the bottom, but not with this shmutz, the seeds that are inside the oil, because in Nisan time already that's all removed. And that's the case where we said in the brayso that it's the seller that has to take the loss of these seeds and not the buyer.